Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we are live from our Abuja studio, and this is TVC Breakfast Show. The Plateau State Governor, Mutfwang, has decried recent attacks on some communities in his state, saying bandits have taken over 64 communities. The governor stated that some of the recently attacked communities were among those that were destroyed in 2023. He further explained that the devastated Ruwi community lost 17 people in the 2023 attack, but they painfully rebuilt only to go through another sad ordeal in the hands of the marauders.
Governor Mutfwang says over 50 persons were killed with hundreds of houses destroyed within a week in separate attacks across 5 communities. The governor described the attacks on the north-central state in the past 10 years as systemic and a genocide against the people on the plateau. During his assessment tour of the devastated communities, the secretary to the state government, Samuel Jatau, called on the federal government to show deeper concern to stop the killing urge and initiate measures that will guarantee lasting peace. Well, it's quite devastating developments in Plateau states, and this issue has gone on for quite a while. My issue is, why hasn't there been any major breakthrough in stopping this attack?
Yeah, if my memory serves me right, I will ask. I've not seen the arrests and prosecution of all those who have been arrested in the last 10 years. And not until you sanction people will take you for granted. And I think that is what has been happening. We must see people arrested, prosecuted, and not just the boys picked. There are sponsors, and we must find a way to get at the big guys sponsoring all this killing spree. And
even with the governor's recent, coming out to say 64 countries and 64 communities are under, the attack from Boko Haram. It's just quite devastating.
It's sad.
Even if you say, because some people will say, why don't you declare a state of emergency 6 years? But it's not the first time that Plateau State has been under the state of emergency, and still these issues persist.
So it means it's beyond state of emergency.
It is beyond it. There's a lot that needs to be done. Government needs to look deeper into the matter. I'm glad that they can identify, the issues and where it's coming from. It is just a matter of, the response to the matter. Well, for more on the security situation in Plateau State, let's speak with a professor of international relations and strategic studies, Chris Kwaja. It's good to have you on the program this morning, Professor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Nigerians.
Good morning to you too. Well, Governor Mutfwang recently admitted that bandits have taken over 64 communities in Plateau State. That's a huge number. How did things get this bad, and why does it seem so difficult to, push back and gain control over these communities? Could it be a lack of resources? Could it be a lack of strategy? What is the problem exactly?
I think I will respond from a national security standpoint, specifically drawing attention to the fact that what Governor Mutfwang said is not new. From Borno to Yobe to Adamawa to Katsina to Zamfara to Kaduna, we've seen communities ravaged, defenseless communities attacked by bandits. And these attacks are coordinated. And that's why you talk of organized crime. Why do you call a crime organized? It is called organized because of the lethality, the precision, and the level with which the whole clinical nature of that attack occurs. Because when you look at what happened in Bokos, you know that it was well planned. It was as if that attack was undertaken by a group that was well trained and programmed with specific outcome in mind. And I want to also draw attention to the fact that we are dealing with a very serious existential challenge. And first, the question will be, do we really have a country? Elementary political science will say the three dominant features of a state: one, population; two, government; and three, territory. Today, that population is under siege. The territory of that country is not protected to the extent that people can come in and out without hindrance. The transnational nature of organized crime, as we see in the Northeast, in the Northwest, and other parts of Nigeria, points to the fact that we are not yet there when it comes to how the Nigerian state is able to marshal the will and the willpower to respond to a major existential threat. Unfortunately, because we politicize security, it is seen more from an identity standpoint. Oh, Christians were killed, Muslims were killed, farmers were killed, herders were killed. When you have a bifurcated interpretation of conflict and insecurity in that context, then you have a very serious issue to deal with when it comes to how you are able to build trust among communities. The focus today is about how do we get our military, our police, to respond to insecurity. And I think that's the standpoint with which Governor Mutfwang made that statement. But I want to draw our attention to two very important issues that came up within this week. First was the outcry by the governor of Zamfara that some bandits were arrested. They confessed to killing people. Unfortunately, in the process of prosecution, some persons in Abuja activated their own networks, and these individuals were granted bail. They were granted bail on offenses they committed that were criminal in nature. The second was the point made by a retired military officer recently, to the extent that the former DG of NYC, Brigadier General Siga, retired, who was kidnapped, that retired military officers had to create a WhatsApp group to mobilize money. We don't know how much, but huge amounts of money, millions, for the release of General Siga. These are retired military officers taking that kind of action. It means this whole question of hope in the Nigerian state for security is a very complicated one. And if the privileged ones are in that situation, you can imagine what an average human being living in a rural community where policing is totally or near absent confronts. But my argument is that if we don't deal with the invasion and occupation of communities by criminal groups in the way we see happen, no place in this country will be safe.
Okay, Prof, just take this question.
Is this something that we cannot solve?
Professor,
and my argument is...
Professor,
no.
Let me come with this question. You rightly said that the way we're handling it was too political. And you talked about the narratives that have been given to all these attacks over time: Muslim fighting Christians, Christian fighting Muslim, herdsmen attacking farmers, farmers attacking herdsmen. But you're saying that it's an invasion of communities. Is it that the government has not realized that the narrative over time that Muslim Christian is the wrong narrative, that it is an invasion? Are they seeing it the way you are saying it?
Unfortunately, no. If government, and when I say government, unfortunately, we have a very unitarist posture of security provisioning in Nigeria, which means only the federal government has 100% responsibility to provide security. This is something you don't find in a serious-minded country. Unfortunately, we are dealing with that in Nigeria, where from the basic security of a community out there, you need a federal government to decide what the kind of security, the nature of security, and who to provide that security to. That should not happen. Because of that, it tells you a story of lack of seriousness on the part of government to deal with this issue. If government put in the kind of seriousness they are putting in on mobilizing votes, or when they see that their opportunities for winning election is threatened, if they put a quarter of that to security provisioning, you will see the difference. And it's a leadership issue. We need a leader that sees Nigeria as his primary constituency, regardless of who is involved. It's unfortunate that we accuse the Abacha regime of autocracy and all that. But people are quoting Abacha to say, Abacha said, if insecurity linger for more than 24 hours, it means government is involved, whether right or wrong in terms of attributional quotation to him. But I tend to believe that because the people need to see government in action. And this action should be one where accountability for criminality is seen to happen. Where are the individuals that have been arrested over time from Borno, Yobe, Katsina, Zamfara? Where are they taken to? What is the nature of prosecution? Who is prosecuting them? People need to see all that in action. Unfortunately, that is not happening. Number two, the question will be, how do we overhaul our security in a way that makes them proactive? It's very simple. If within the current federal design, we are not able to achieve effectiveness and efficiency in security provisioning, what do? There are options that I see. One, the decentralization of security provisioning should be prioritized. Get vigilantes. And I want to give you two examples that I saw. In Yola, for instance, at the peak of the insurgency, the vice chancellor of the Modibo Adama University, Professor Mohammed Kyari, all he did was very simple. Got the communities to contribute to security of the university. They came in as vigilantes and they took over the protection of the university from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning. Nothing happened within that period because the communities were vigilant. They were armed with the kind of guns that government has legitimized. And the university, as I speak to right now, that is what you find in Yola. And it's working, it's effective because the members of the communities have a very nuanced understanding of the threats. They know where the hideouts are. They know where to position themselves. Just recently, I undertook in a hospital in Kaduna State, the Federal Neuropsychiatric Hospital in Kaduna. The medical director was confronted with this issue of tires of vehicles stolen in the night and some other petty crimes. And all she did was very simple. She got the communities to bring in vigilantes who took over the security of the hospital from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Ever since that decision was taken, not a pin has gone missing in that hospital. I'm just giving you an example of simple models that leadership that is proactive is doing. If these are models that are happening in Nigeria, they are very practical, we can feel them, we can see them. How much more government, where you have the resources to deploy, where you have communities that you can engage. And my argument over time is that we lost an opportunity to study the civilian joint task force in Borno State, Operation Rainbow in Plateau State, rather than looking at them as state-level apparatus for provisioning that are competing with the federal government. The federal government should ask the simple question, what can we do to optimize, to make these structures stronger? Is it that from the perspective of arms, you need this kind of arms? From the perspective of training, you need this kind of training? How do we activate joint patrol and early warning response capabilities with these individuals? We will work with you to vet the kind of individuals that will be recruited.
I would like to take this context. After the December 2023 attack, some North Central governors came to Plateau State, and we saw Governor Abdullahi Sule say there's a need for a united strategy and a stronger border control. And I would like to read a part of his statement for context, where he said, I quote, the problem of incessant unprovoked attacks on farming communities have become common in the 4 states. There is every need for a united strategy, willpower, and also check the borders to checkmate the menace. Now, beyond this statement, will you say these are mere words or real actions have been taken so far?
The operative word there in that statement is there is a need. When you use the word there is a need in a statement of that nature, it means you are accepting the fact that this responsibility is something that is beyond you. And that proposal that Governor A.A. Sule made was to the federal government, because border control issues are purely federal responsibility. No state has the power to deal with border issues. They only have control over boundary issues: Plateau, Nasarawa, Benue, Taraba, and all that. But when it comes to engagement around border security with countries that surround Nigeria, no state has that power. So it's a responsibility that the federal government of Nigeria must take seriously. Unfortunately, when you ask the question, what has been done? To the extent that government is not able to proactively communicate with citizens on what it is doing or what has been done, citizens are in the dark. And I will give you one example. I visited the National Assembly Center for Security Analysis. And one of the discussions there with the DG was, how do we get the National Assembly to look at the plight of border communities with specific focus on activating, particularly those committees on national security, defense, and all that, activating legislative issues around law and order and security within those areas, because these communities have been neglected by government, and because they've been neglected by government, it's easy for them to collude with criminals. They give them right of passage because these criminals give them money. They give them what the government is not giving them. The federal government established the border communities.
Governor Abdullahi Sule's speech, his statement was particularly focused on the collaboration between the governors in the North Central. What I'm trying to ask is, have you observed this collaboration within the governors, or this was just a mere political speech?
It might not be a political speech to the extent that they've identified an issue, but they are also limited. And unfortunately for many of these governors, they have to speak in that way, yet right inside them, they know that they don't have the capacity to deal with that security issue. Because if there is insecurity, what do? You have to call on the police, civil defense, joint task force. You are not in control of any of these institutions of the state. They are purely federal institutions. So you can only appeal to them. And if you appeal, they tell you the security report you have is different from what we have. And it's good I draw your attention to what the current Minister of FCT said. Yes, on Wike. Wike said there were instances where he had to tell the security people that this intelligence report you are giving me is fake. What I have is different from what you are having. This is fake. Nigerians laughed over those statements because it's Wike. But that's the real situation that an average governor is confronted with
now,
today. Because as a governor, you are not in charge of anything, but yet you are the chief security officer of your state. And part of what I'm saying...
Prof, let me just come up with this question. I need you to make this clarification, Professor. That you rightly said that the governors are the chief security officers of their states, but really, in reality, they have no authority over security apparatus. But we also know that these same governors, if they have an interest, they know how to push and get those interests. What I'm asking is, if your state is challenged, if your region is challenged, and you know you are not in charge of the police and all that, are we saying that the governors cannot push and exert their pressure to ensure that the federal government cave in certain areas? Or is it that we all agree that, look, let's keep moving, let's keep running the nation the way it is, so long we are not the ones that are being killed. So let's keep running the way it is.
There are two sides to this conversation. The first is about whether or not the Nigerian Governors Forum is not just a political platform. If it is a platform that should represent the interests of the citizens that they serve or they govern, they should have the capacity to engage the federal government. We've seen them do that with FAC. When they are shortchanged, they go to court. And at several instances, they won. Now, they need to activate that. But when it comes to some other issues, they are divided along party lines. Who is the chairman of the Governors Forum? What is his relationship with the federal government? What is the body language of the federal government when it comes to the issue in a particular state? What is the interest of the federal government when it comes to the issue in a particular state? The second is about citizens' agency. Can citizens mobilize themselves to demand accountability, to get government to do the right thing? Yes, to the extent that we see these problems as a Nigerian problem. Look at ordinary protests. Protests don't succeed because they are defined along ethnic and religious lines. And I gave you an example. Those who protested against Jonathan years ago were the same people saying, pray for our leaders today. Tomorrow, a president will come. The same people that are saying, pray for our leaders today, will be the ones saying, God says, you should not allow wicked leaders to govern. Get them out. So that inconsistency in articulating and mobilizing or harnessing critical voices to demand good governance in Nigeria is the major challenge that we face as a people. And that's why we have the kind of characters that we have today at the National Assembly. They have unfortunately become rubber stamps, because what you see happening today should not even happen. And I will just give you one example. In this same country, the United States Congress organized a public hearing on killings in Nigeria. As I speak now, the National Assembly of this country has not uttered a word on that. That decision by the US Congress on its own borders on the sovereignty of Nigeria. But the National Assembly is mute because they are not concerned. That's to tell you the kind of characters that we have presiding over law and order.
But Professor, we see at several points in time, lawmakers rise, to state these issues of the attack in their state, and recommendations are made with resolutions. So is it completely right to say that they are not concerned about this because they are always raising these issues whenever they are attacked?
They are not concerned to the extent that the responsibility of the National Assembly is not just about resolution. They have oversight responsibilities. We need boots on the ground. We need shoes on the ground. They need to go to that place. They have the power to hold the executive accountable. But many of them are afraid of recall, or they might not come back. And we've seen what happened to people like Budaji Kazori. We've seen what happened to many other members of the National Assembly who were forthright in speaking about the ills of our society and what government should be seen to be doing. But unfortunately, they were denied tickets to come back to the National Assembly. It also boils down to getting citizens to understand that if we don't take our destiny serious by ensuring that we fight to get the right people to represent us, we will continue this cycle of complaint. And this is something that is not rocket science. We can do it.
The National Assembly ordered an inquiry into the statements on security credited to the U.S. congressman a few weeks before they proceeded on their break. Doesn't that also count for something?
It doesn't count because we are talking of an inquiry that happened. There was a public hearing in the Congress of the United States, not a statement now. That statement is an afterthought. On the day that public hearing happened, what did the National Assembly do? If I am the Speaker or the Senate President, I would write to the Embassy of the United States expressing displeasure or taking exception to an encroachment on the sovereignty of the Nigerian state in the context of what has happened. But you see, the flip side to it is, if you know that you are guilty of not doing what was discussed there in terms of effectiveness in security provisioning, then you cannot muster the kind of bravery I'm talking about to even call the U.S. Embassy or U.S. Congress to order, because it has failed. So the National Assembly have a responsibility, and this responsibility must be discharged in a way that restores trust and hope on democratic governance in Nigeria, because people are saying under the military this will not happen. That's a vote of no confidence on democracy. Prof, if we allow that to happen.
Prof, now let's look at Plateau State that the governor just talked about taking over communities, and the narrative out there now is it's because of the economic wealth in those communities. You have people sending the natives or the residents away so that they can take them over. Now, in this circumstance, what should the people, what should the government of Plateau State, and what should the military in Plateau State do to help restore normalcy to those communities?
Under President Muhammadu Buhari, I was a co-drafter of the National Livestock Transformation Plan. It was a rare privilege to be part of that process of looking at how sustainable solutions will be crafted in responding to the farmer-herder conflict. And from the perspective of peace building, law and order, there's a section in that plan where we talked about resettling displaced people, that the federal government must, as a matter of urgency, prioritize the return of people to their ancestral land, dignified return. It would be unfortunate if today we are saying the federal government cannot go to communities where people have been displaced to get them back to their communities. It means government has ceded its own sovereignty. And I think for me, that is something the federal government must do. There's no state governor who can do that. From Zamfara to Katsina to Kaduna to Borno to Yobe, no state governor can activate and implement that policy. You need the federal government to take primary responsibility for that. Most of these communities that have been displaced are communities that are agrarian in nature, are communities that are fertile, are communities that are contributing to the GDP of this country in terms of food production. So by design or by default, By not doing that, the federal government or the Nigerian state is contributing to food insecurity in the country, contributing to generalized insecurity in the country, contributing to poverty in the country, and contributing to the hopelessness and the misery that we see is defining the everyday lives of Nigerians.
Well, Professor, we've seen displaced families living in very poor conditions in temporary camps. Why does it seem like there is no proper system in place to help them?
In 2001, the Obasanjo administration designed what they call the National Disaster Response Plan. And I've gone through that plan. It's a robust plan for coordination, for responsibilities that deals with disaster of all magnitude and nature. But that document has not been fully harnessed. The Ministry for Humanitarian Affairs was established. And the question will be, to what extent did the government review the National Disaster Response Plan and the place of NEMA and the Ministry for Humanitarian Affairs in looking at how to get a comprehensive response plan for disaster management? And this disaster management plan should be one that is preemptive to the extent that you cannot sit down and get confronted with a disaster challenge only for people to be in the camps for months while you wait for donors to bring in money before you begin to help these individuals. I think for me, we need to really take time to review our capacity, our infrastructure for disaster response. One of the governors was telling me that, see, even we as governors are traumatized. Now you are also dealing with a country that is traumatized. How do we deal with issue of trauma? Because part of the problem we are having today is that victims that we see today will be criminals tomorrow. What kind of mental health support are we giving them with a view to ensuring that we restore their dignity and humanity? Because if they pass through what we see through these camps, in terms of their status as displaced people that are hopeless, that are living in misery, yet the same government officials who go there to visit them come in 10, 20 jeeps. Tomorrow they will believe that since I'm hopeless, criminality is the best way to respond to my own insecurity. Right. So they need that mental health support. Unfortunately, this is one area that Nigeria is lacking when it comes to mental health provisioning and support. We have a mental health act in the country, but to what extent are we investing in mental health? We only see it as a hospital responsibility. Right. What is the nature of community engagement we are having from the perspective
we've run out of time.
Integrating mental health in security provisioning?
We've run out of time, but we must thank you so much for joining us on the program. It was quite insightful hearing your contributions. Thank you so much for your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you, my pleasure. Bye.
Well, this story is coming out of Plateau State is quite disheartening, and it's just a reminder that beyond the headlines, there are real people who have lost their homes, their lives, livelihoods, and all of that. And as the conversation continues to deepen around security and humanitarian support, it's just our hope that these words translate into solid action.
Yeah, I think that's just the way to go. Government must behave like government and restore hope for the ordinary people.
Well, that's why we'll have to leave the conversation this morning. Thank you for sticking with us. We'll hand you over now to our Lagos studio where Veronica and the rest of the crew are standing by to continue with the rest of the show.